Welcome, everybody, to the Soul of the Unexplained. And we are kicking off episode number 19 today. Roger, I don't know about you, but I can't believe we've actually made it 19 episodes.
I know it's been a fast, furious run. So 19 and more to come. So super excited.
Absolutely. So, folks, we have a real awesome show lined up for you tonight. And we have a guest that I am so excited to be able to present to all of you here on the Soul of the Unexplained. And joining us tonight is none other than Christopher Bartel. And those of you that are fans of this TV series, the docu-series, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, will understand who Chris Bartel is. And just so much cool stuff to talk to this amazing gentleman about. And so we're going to get started right now by welcoming Chris Bartel. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
absolutely. So what do you make of how everything in the world is just kind of, let's say from like 2017 or from the time that you actually your time at Skinwalker Ranch ended to where we are right now in 2024, where there's been this news article telling us about how the Pentagon actually did have these UAP and UFO investigation departments, and just how it's all kind of become kind of the mainstream consciousness, kind of a crazy part from where a crazy journey from where I'm sure you were in 2016, right
Yeah.
before Brandon Fugel's team took over, to where everything is right now.
Yeah, it's pretty surreal for me because, obviously with my background and working at the ranch for 6 years, during my timeline of 2010 to 2016, I never thought in a million years that Skinwalker Ranch would be a mainstream topic like it is today. The 2017 article, I didn't even honestly when that when that came out, I was still working at Bigelow Aerospace when that came out, and I didn't even pay any attention to it because when the ranch was sold to Brandon, that was pretty much, it for us. And I wasn't really piqued in the interest that much. So I just assumed, okay, that makes sense. And then, some of the places I worked at prior to coming to Skinwalker Ranch, I was like, okay, that makes sense. There's probably something out there, but I had no idea about the OSAP program until I was asked to become an advisor for the first season of Skinwalker Ranch in 2019. And I went back out there to to meet the new team, but also pass over important intel that I wanted to meet light to the team. And so that's when I learned about OSAP was in 2019, and I was like, what? And then it kind of led me down this whole path of discovery, and it's been it's been a pretty wild ride since 2019, and now I think I'm at a point where I feel pretty good. There was a time I was kind of negative about stuff, and now I've shedded some of that negative weight, and I have some closure now, and I feel pretty good. And it's kind of cool to see the future of where it's going now. I think it's pretty awesome that the ranch is a topic that everybody's discussing, and it brings a lot of people out to the Uinta Basin, which I think is important as well. So yeah, it's been kind of a wild trip for me, and to see it all unfold.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about how you got started in this whole great big endeavor. And if I remember correctly, just reading from your bio, you got started in the Air Force. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah, I
And
joined the Air Force in 1997. I'm from a small town in Kansas called Hillsborough, Kansas.
ah,
So I joined the Air Force in '97, almost out of high school, and was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada, from 1998 to 2006, active duty, and then from '06 to '09, reserves. During my time active duty, I was security forces police officer sergeant. I was also a cadre instructor for Creech Air Force Base,
hmm,
a place called Silver Flag Alpha, GCTS, which stands for Ground Combat Training Squadron, where we train other cops for deployment purposes and stuff. And
Mhm.
then when I got out of the Air Force, I got hired with the Department of Energy for the Nevada test site at Mercury, Nevada, where I obtained a Q level clearance. And once I got my Q clearance, that's when a whole lot more doors kind of open up for you because it is a very hard clearance to get. And that eventually led me getting hired for the Janet detail for Area 51. At the same time, being hired as BASS But how I got there was my wife, who was in the Air Force as well, she got orders to Malmstrom Air Force Base in probably mid 2009.
Mhm.
So I had to leave the test site and move to Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana, to be with her. And we got pregnant with our first child, and she made the decision to say, hey, I don't want to be a deployment mom, because she was a cop as well. And so the Air Force was downsizing. So we actually went back to Las Vegas. And on that way back is when I got hired for a company that had a contract for A-51 first, because I still had an active Q clearance.
Mhm.
And then I called another friend of mine, because it was a part-time gig. I needed a full-time gig.
Right.
And I called another friend of mine who had this detail in Utah.
Mhm.
And he was very vague about what the job was. This was back in 2010. And it helped that I had a clearance for sure, but it helped that I knew him in the Air Force at Nellis, because Nellis is such a unique hub, for people of my background. So I got hired with Bass and started working the ranch probably a month later, and then that place became my home. And then that's how I got there. So before I even got to Skinwalker Ranch, I had already spent years in special access programs for the DOE, doing stuff for the Air Force, and then here I am at Skinwalker Ranch. So it was very unique experience.
Wow, that's awesome. You're still in law enforcement currently,
Right.
is that right?
I'm currently a federal police officer right now. Yeah. So I'm still, so basically 26 years in law enforcement investigations has been my background. Hopefully soon here I can retire. I'm looking forward to it. Hope maybe in a couple more years I can finally get that retirement badge, but I'm getting close.
Great. Well, that's awesome. I don't know if I ever told you, my eldest son was pursuing a career in law enforcement for a while, and he went and graduated from the same police academy that Caleb Bench did
Oh, wow.
right here in Salt Lake. And my son decided to try being a corrections officer, a CO.
Oh,
Quite a
yeah.
different world from what you do, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole different world.
But it's still still part of the same family, if you will,
Mhm.
of law enforcement. And one thing that my son and Caleb also reinforced with me is that when you're a law enforcement officer, when you're tasked with keeping the peace and being one of those officers, your word is your bond. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to you know not only be a really good observer, but you have to make sure that everything that you are reporting, like in your after action reports and things like that, that everything is as detailed and truthful as possible, because eventually you're going to be you have the likelihood, that probably the certainty of ending up in court on any one of a number of given cases that you may be involved in. And so because of that, your integrity is basically, your reputation is probably the biggest asset that you have. Is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And also when you go through those academies, you get trained in investigations as well. And I think that's a very key component when we talk about places like Skinwalker Ranch, because I really believe there's this misconception that those of us who are on that ranch were just like some type of Walmart security guards
Right.
out there. And that's not the truth at all. We were the ones, yes, that secured the property, but we were also the ones who conducted the investigations, who did the daily reports that were being faxed to the Pentagon, who collected data, who conducted experiments, and then also had data collected on us during that time as well. So, you know, um, we did a lot. We had a lot of hats working at the ranch all those years.
Right. I'm sure of it. It's really a point that I want to emphasize with our viewers and our listeners, is that just as when we've had Caleb on our podcast, and Caleb reinforces the importance of, he places honesty and integrity above everything else, because his word has to be, it's literally his word is his bond. And
Absolutely.
so for you, coming from that same law enforcement background, with people, I don't think we can emphasize enough how important it is that whenever Caleb makes an observation on the ranch, or whenever you make an observation, you're not just simply putting a spin or any kind of particular speculation on something, unless you specifically say, well, this is what I think it might be. But
Right.
as far as factual stuff, you do everything on a very specific process that you follow to gather data, gather intelligence, and make note of it and report it accordingly and stick to the facts.
Mhm.
And so that's something that I think a lot of people, particularly people that watch the docuseries, may not truly understand the depth to which somebody like you or Caleb end up having to go to be able to, maintain your employment with these
Right.
security clearances and the trust that not just the city, county, or state puts in you, but that anybody that you come in contact with has to have that trust in you. And if you do anything to violate that trust, then that's you can't walk back from that, can you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that for sure. 100%. Yep.
Right on. So another thing that's cool about Caleb, and we can kind of jump into Skinwalker Ranch here. And Raj, I know there was a little bit that you wanted to. We got this great bio that you sent to us, Chris, and Roger and I have read it. And there's one part in the bio that really kind of stuck out to us. And Raj, I'm going to let you read that real quick.
Yeah, it's in your bio, you have this saying, which both Jim and I really, really like and appreciate, and just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on it more. And it's Skinwalker Ranch is not about entertainment for me. It's a location that I take very seriously and a place that I dedicated a lot of my time to. So we know you're out at Skinwalker Ranch there for 6 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about um, the location and based on that statement, what makes you so passionate about Skinwalker Ranch and your time there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a true statement. Obviously, I support the team and the show because I think it brings more people to the Uinta Basin, which is obviously important because there's so much history out there for people to see and experience. And I'm not knocking the TV show at all. And I totally support the team. I've been out there several times with or without the TV show and hung out there and provided my insights. But yeah, for me personally, it's something I take very serious. I invested a lot of time, physical time out there, and my family sacrificed for that. And not just me, I'm representing a small group of guys who also sacrificed their time out there as well. And, I always tell people you're not going to learn about Skinwalker Ranch spending a couple of days out there or even weeks out there. You have to really invest your physical time into that location to kind of understand what that place is about. You got to tune in your own personal frequency to the ranch frequency if you want to tap into what's out there. And that's my personal belief. Because when I was out there, I spent so much time outside exploring the property. And I kind of viewed the ranch as like a giant crime scene. I was trying to figure out the pieces to the puzzle of the ranch. And I wasn't really paying too much attention to the sky because of my previous experiences in the Air Force and DOE and all that. I kind of felt like I had a pretty good grasp of what's in our skies, but I wanted to figure out, okay, what is going on out here? Can I find physical evidence to back up people's claims? And for me, at the time, I had a topographical map of the property of Skinwalker Ranch. And every time I'd find something like an area of interest, whether it be the caves that I showed the team and stuff like that, or hollowed out rock, or a Native American, what I believe is a very sacred Native American site, or an Indian artifact, I would take a GPS location and a photograph and map it out on the map. And I was discovering that there was a correlation between people's experiences and an abundance of artifacts or an area of interest, that there was some type of correlation there. And then throughout the years and talking to some of the locals, the evidence that I followed, the data that I collected led to the conclusion that it's the indigenous history that holds true. That history, that frequency, energy, and vibration is displaced into the natural environment. And some of the negative blowback that people have reported throughout the years is because trampling around on sacred grounds or these hallowed grounds where you have to have respect for the property or it's going to bite you back. I kind of believe that there's some type of consciousness out there, that knows a person's genuine self, their true self. And I picked up on that. And I saw guys on my team that didn't show some of the same respect and get kind of eaten up by that place as well, you know. And yeah, so I mean, I spent years out there to the point where I was sleeping at night with the dogs on the mesa, stargazing. Um, you know, I felt like the more I immersed myself physically into the property, the more layers were being pulled back, if that makes any sense. And I think Eric Bard is on that same thing. Eric Bard has invested a tremendous amount of his own physical time into that property, and he kind of understands that it isn't a place where you can't necessarily click uh, data all the time. It's more of almost like a spiritual aspect. Is more, you know, I really believe going out there and elevating your consciousness is key to all this. Caleb is the same way. You know, Caleb's a solid guy, and I have a lot of respect for him. But it's kind of cool seeing him go down the same path of discovery that I did out there. You know, and Thomas Winterton and also Melissa Winterton too. She's tapped in to that frequency out there as well, and they understand that connecting to the property on a more spiritual aspect is key. Much what these indigenous cultures did before us. You know, what we consider what we call the phenomena, these indigenous tribes refer to as just their culture, and they accept it. So, you know, I was going back through some of my old photography, and I remember the summers out there of walking around on top of the mesa barefoot and just kind of like really trying to tap in to that more spiritual side of it. I really felt that was kind of the key to understanding the property, you know. And so, yeah, I take the ranch very serious for me. And when I bring people out there, I tell them the same things. Hey, these are sacred grounds. You know, offer, give offerings of tobacco or whatever you can do to the area. Bless the area. So that's kind of my whole thought process on that whole Uinta Basin area. And I've been to Blind Frog Ranch, I've been to McKee Springs, McConkey Ranch, and obviously Mount Wilson Ranch. But you know, Skinwalker Ranch has a very special place in my heart. I feel almost soul bound to that property. That's kind of hard for me to watch the TV show sometimes because I love the show, but it's so hard because it just rips me apart because I can smell the sage when I watch that show, and I can taste the dirt in my mouth from walking out there. And I really miss those nights with the dogs looking at the stars at night, man. Those are memories I'll never get back. I'll never forget. And looking back, I really realized how unique that experience was for me personally. So I cherish my time out there.
That's awesome. And you brought up a point that is something that, if you remember, Roger, Caleb, our very first podcast episode that we did with Caleb, um, was something that he touched upon, and he has a number of times, and you just touched upon it as well, Chris, which is when you go out to the ranch, it's almost like the ranch can sense. Um, I don't know if consciousness is the right word, but if you go on the ranch with this attitude, with an attitude of humility and an
Mhm.
attitude of, not going in there all with all this bravado, like, this is all bullshit, and I'm going to prove that it's bullshit.
Right.
Um, Caleb said that he's noticed that there, when you go on, and I'm probably paraphrasing here, so Caleb, forgive me if I get this wrong, but basically the general gist of it is that you want to go on the property with that humility, and
Mhm.
that if you do, the ranch responds. And like you were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, whatever kind of attitude you go onto the ranch with, it's going to either augment that and amplify it, or it's going to find a way to humble you, basically. I
Absolutely.
guess you would say. So I was really it was really interesting to hear you say essentially the same kind of thing, um, because that's kind of the. Now I've never, Roger and I have been out to, when we've driven down by where the tribal police office is, but
Mhm.
Roger and I are like, well, no, we don't want to drive up to the stop sign where the barrier is there, because we don't want to, we don't want to interfere, we don't want to, trespass and things like that. But even getting within, what was it, Raj? Maybe a mile and a half from the actual where the gate would have
Yeah, the
been.
property.
You just feel, and really, I think once you first come into the Uinta Basin, there's just a different energy and a different
Mhm.
vibe to that whole area. And when I first learned about Skinwalker Ranch, it was back in about, I'd say, 2006, because I read the book that Colm Kelleher and George Knapp did, the Hunt for the Skinwalker.
Yeah.
And in reading that, and I remember the local newspaper here in Salt Lake also ran an article about Terry Sherman when he was living on the ranch and some of the extraordinary encounters that he claims to have had for that. And then it's been really an interesting education for both Roger and I because that was all that we had to base any of our information on was what that first book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, was all about.
Hmm.
Um, and then the docuseries comes out, and then the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon books comes out, and we're starting to learn that in fact, the way that Dr. Travis Taylor puts it is that the Hunt for the Skinwalker is a great book. It's got some interesting stories, but it's basically a collection of ghost stories because they didn't have any data to be able to back up any of the extraordinary stories. And
Right.
it's not too hard to understand because some of the more extraordinary stories came from Terry and Gwen Sherman. And of
Right.
course they're not going to have, cameras and, thermal imaging and things like that
Right.
to be able to confirm, if what they saw really was what they thought they saw. So it's been kind of an entirely different ball of wax, if you will, moving forward to the time when you got there because I'm assuming you got in there probably was it toward the tail end of the NIDS time or after the NIDS time?
Yeah, there were no NIDS out there at all whatsoever. I got there strictly under the OSAP program. I didn't know about OSAP, but strictly for bass. But that's a good point you bring up about them being a lot of stories and no data. And it's no fault to NIDS, but NIDS were not trained investigators. They were scientists.
Right.
Just because you're a scientist doesn't mean you're an investigator automatically. And I say that with respect, but I've interviewed hundreds of people in investigations, and sometimes the investigation is not so much what they're saying, but you need to investigate the individual of who's saying it. And that's where you're going to find some faults. And I don't think NIDS did that. I think they did a great job of data collecting and a stupendous job at data collecting. But as far as investigating the ranch, I don't think they did a proper job investigating the ranch because when we got there, like I said, most of my team, all of us were prior law enforcement, and some of the stories that were matching up to some of the claims from previously. So I think there was some lack in digging in, because I think,
Mhm.
you want to believe, take people's word for it, because some of these stories are very, outrageous. But then if you really, like you said before, if you're going to present data, you have to think that, okay, if I present this to a trial or to a judge or to a group of people, what are they going to think of this? And stories
Exactly.
are great, but, data is important as well, but also getting some of the facts out. And that was with me. I had, if I reported something on a report, it was either backed up with my photography, a secondary witness, or physical evidence. And that's why I focused on the Native American aspect because I had physical evidence that was non-negotiable. And some of those artifacts go back to the Paleo period, 8,000 years ago. So that shows you how critical that location is. For 8,000 years, people have been going there. But on top of that, I had secondary witnesses, and I also had the backing of the Ute Nation. The Ute Nation that's out there fully support my theory of the Native American aspect. And sometimes that's overlooked. And I think that was overlooked on a lot of this stuff. And, but yeah, I didn't read the book until I was out there on that ranch until almost a couple months after I was hired there. And there was nothing online about Skinwalker Ranch or,
Right.
there was very little data. So for me, you had to be boots on the ground type of investigation out there to kind of figure out what was going on. And also at the time, I had an active Q clearance
Mhm.
and I couldn't put things on paper, that, especially things that were going to the Pentagon,
Right.
unless I had some type of factual evidence. But there was also a flip to that. There were situations where I encountered things and I was afraid to put what I saw, thinking that they would think I was crazy or lying about something, and they would pull my clearance.
Yank
Because this
that
is
clearance
back
from
in,
you. Yeah.
Right.
yeah, back in 2010. If I was out there saying I saw this, and it had nothing to really back it up, they'd be like, pull that guy's clearance. He's a lunatic.
Yeah.
I think I talked with you in person about the wolf experience that I had in
Right.
2010,
Right.
and I was very hesitant about what I said in that report, but it was real. I have photographic evidence and a secondary witness to that event. So
Yeah.
you're right. There was, you have to, and we want the scientific evidence, of course. We want the
Right.
scientific method, but also I believe it's the native method that matters. My personal opinion, it's the native method that
Yeah.
matters.
And I think you're hitting it right on the head. And this is something that I've felt for a long time. And um, it really helped. Obviously, Jeff Freeman. We all know who Jeff is,
Oh
and
yeah.
big friends of Jeff's. We think the world of him, and I've been on his podcast a number of times. And last year, I had the privilege of being able to talk with John Dover and John's Navajo Ranger partner
Hmm.
about some of the experiences that they've had down there in the Navajo Nation. And it was great to be able to talk to them both in the green room before and after we finished recording that episode, because I've always felt, and it's a lot of it's because of the way my mom and dad raised me.
Yeah.
My mom and dad raised me that, just because the Native Americans and indigenous people have a different way of describing the way that their traditions are. If you really just sit back and listen to what they're telling you, it fits in perfectly and completely with what, my religion teaches, and just
Hmm.
simply what makes common sense to me as well. Everything from, the fact that they believe that there are other dimensions out there that exist in the same space that we do. It's just that for whatever reason, we don't have the means to perceive them with our five senses, uh, and that sometimes those dimensions bleed into each other, or the barrier or the veil, as it were, between those dimensions sometimes gets really thin. Um, but that's just one such example of how I think that the traditions and the history of these ancient peoples, particularly here in the United States. Now, for starters, I don't think that our history is complete. I think that what we're taught to be the anthropological and archaeological history of not just here in North America, but just humanity in general, I think it's incomplete. And
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of things that get passed down through traditions that we just simply, for whatever reason, academia decides to discard it,
Right.
because it doesn't fit. And I hate to use the term, but it doesn't seem to fit their narrative sometimes to
Right.
admit the fact that, well, maybe humanity is a lot older than we think it is, or maybe there were people that settled here on this continent before we the accepted current time frame is when they got here. And an interesting point that you made about the Uinta Basin, and I know that you and I talked about this last year at Phenomicon, Chris, is that I think that there's a great deal of history to the Uinta Basin that we're not even really beginning to scratch the surface
Right.
on some of the things that are out there, because um, obviously there's a lot of interesting artifacts that you found out there in the form of arrowheads and petroglyphs and great things like that. But there's all kinds of accounts and stories from what I would call some credible sources of people finding, for want of a better word, like out of place artifacts, things that shouldn't be there, like things that seem to have undeniably some kind of like an Egyptian origin or an ancient
Hmm.
Roman or Greek or Phoenician. And our history tells us that, well, that's not possible. And because it's not possible, well, we're just going to simply, call it a fake or call it whatever the heck it is. When the
Right.
reality is, we don't know, because we don't have a complete record. And we know that, at least going back to the times of the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians, they were seafaring cultures, right? I mean, they were able to hop in a boat and, wherever the trade winds or the seas carried them, that's where they ended up. And sometimes I think they could have ended up in a place far, far away from where they intended to go, and may have ended up here on this North American continent.
Absolutely.
And who's to say that these legends that we hear about Egyptian artifacts being found in the Grand Canyon, or how I guess in Idaho there was a farmer that was out plowing his potato field, and he dug up basically what was an artifact that was from, they dated it to King Tut's time, and they've done all the dating on it, and as near as they can tell, it was authentic. And so little things like that kind of led me to think that our history is far more interesting than we think it is.
I
And
agree.
because of that, we should never discount or even completely discard. We should be paying attention to the history of these indigenous tribes, the
Hmm.
and the culture that they have, because I think we all as humans back in those days, back in the ancient times, I think we were far more receptive to these things that we now consider mysteries because we were
Right.
more, maybe it's because we didn't have our brains scrambled by all the technology,
That's
and
exactly it.
even people from say 100 years ago where telephones and cell phones and even the automobile was kind of not really in the mainstream consciousness, as it were.
Hmm.
So I have to wonder if maybe some of those ancient tribes, ancient cultures, if they knew how to tap into some of that, whatever we want to call it, that we as people living in the 21st century have a difficult time grasping until we make an effort, a solid effort to go and find a way to connect with that. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree 1000%. I think it's to a point where I've talked about elevating human consciousness.
Right.
But in order to do that, you have to make attempts to meditate, take your shoes off, and ground yourself physically to the earth. Because the people before us, they were grounded to the earth. They understood the connectiveness between themselves, the earth, and the universe, and there was a solid connection. There were no boundaries other than the physical realm of each other, but spiritually they were all connected. So once you kind of put your mind at that, you know, reality, you see the world in a whole different matter. I had this quote that was on the back of my one of my first business cards as a photographer, and it says, "The more positive energy you produce on a daily basis is what springs your celestial spirit forward into the future." And if people had that mindset of,
I
hey, if
like
I
that.
create enough positive energy while I'm here, that's what springs my celestial spirit forward into the universe. And I think that's absolutely key to this understanding. And all it really takes is, man, like you said, put down the phone, go out in nature. I mean, when's the last time anyone has ever spent 2 weeks alone on a property or out in the wilderness with no cell phone, nothing? I bet a lot, majority of everybody can say they haven't. That was one of the benefits of me working at Skinwalker Ranch. The cell service out there was almost, there was none.
Non-existent, I'm sure. Yeah.
And the new team can clarify on that for sure. There was nobody else out there but myself and the dogs for 2 weeks. And there was ranch managers out there, but they were homebound pretty much. So those 2 weeks I was out there basically camping out, getting paid to look for the paranormal stuff, look for anything out of the ordinary, collect data, and then try to connect to the property. And I took full advantage of that. And through that was when I understood that, okay, this is a more of a spiritual journey that I'm going on here. And then throughout the years, I've been kind of helping people to see that too, and meeting like Crawl the Crusher and James Keenan, all these guys that have come into my life since then. We're all on that same kind of path. But yeah, all it is going out to the woods or wherever you're at and really kind of grounding yourself. And I do this technique now where I go out to the most recent trip was like Mount Wilson Ranch in Nevada. And I'll
Mhm.
go out there with my camera and I'll go out alone and I'll walk around, take pictures, listen to the winds. Like my mom used to, my mom's Cherokee. So she raised me very Buddhist, basically, very, very open. Listen to the winds. And then I'll take 2 stones from that location, physical stones, and I come back to my home and I'll do a meditation session holding those stones. And then I go back to my photography and start doing some flip imagery and seeing things that I missed, And I'll play drum music, powwow music, or Indian flute music while I'm doing it, and just really kind of elevate my frequency and tap into that. And I think everybody has the power to do that. The problem is, like you said, we have so many distractions in life, TV, everything. And I'm
Yeah.
guilty of it as well. But
Mhm.
the kids I'm raising now, I'm trying to get them more out into the nature and tap into that and kind of get a head start. I think that's important.
Absolutely. I always tell people, I don't teach my kids to be good Christians. I try to teach my kids to be good human beings, because if
Mhm.
they can figure out what it takes to be a good human being, then they will automatically become a better Christian, a better,
Right.
whatever it is that they want to be. Um, and my grandfather was an awful lot like what you just described. I don't have any Native American heritage in me, but I do have Viking heritage, which is almost
Me too.
almost as cool. But
On my dad's side, I do too. Yeah.
yeah, right on. Well,
Yep.
On my dad's side, it's traces back to a Viking warlord by the name of Eric the Red,
Oh
and
yeah. Eric Red.
his son was Leif Erikson, who of
Hmm.
course was a famous Viking explorer. So that's where I get it from.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but no, just the whole bit of and I know that you know what I'm talking about when I say this, which is when you're out in nature, it's like the peace and serenity that's there when you're out in the middle especially for me up in the mountains because I love the mountains.
Hmm.
It's what drove me to move out from the East Coast. Now don't get me wrong, I am a New Yorker through and through. I'm a proud New Yorker, but I've now lived in Utah longer than I ever lived in New York. And I absolutely what drew me out here was the mountains because there
Oh.
was just something the very first time that I ever saw mountains in person. I mean,
Hmm.
you see them on TV and it's like, oh, well, yeah, mountains are big, blah, blah, blah. But then when you've never seen a mountain up close and you see one, you're just like completely dumbfounded at how huge this thing is. And then where I live here along the Salt Lake, the Wasatch Front here, it doesn't matter what time of day. The mountains look different every single time of day because of the way that the sun hits them. And I just never ever get tired of seeing, looking out my window and seeing those gorgeous mountains off to the east. And I just it's something that grounds me. It always has. And that's why whenever I would go out hunting or fishing with my dad, it took me years to figure out. In fact, right shortly before my dad passed, we were talking about the times that he and I used to go out deer hunting. And I was somebody who didn't like to, I liked being outdoors, but I didn't like, I didn't want to, it's not that I didn't have that I had a problem killing deer because we were going to use the deer, but I wasn't a killer, you know?
Right.
And so what I enjoyed most about going out deer hunting with my dad was just simply being outdoors with my dad. And now fishing was something different. I love fishing. I mean, I'll catch fish all day and love doing that. But even then, it's the same kind of thing. It's just that natural frequency of a mountain stream.
Mm.
If you've ever been out there up to Flaming Gorge, I mean,
Mm.
some of the best trout fishing in the world, I think. And just
Beautiful out there.
you can just there's just something that I know I'm doing horrible at trying to articulate what it is, but when you're out there in nature and you've turned, completely disconnected from your technology and all that you have to focus on is just the here and now in the moment, being out there in that beautiful nature, being there with, for me it was with my dad or with my sons. Um, it's like a slice of heaven. I mean, it really is because it puts me, it calms me, it soothes me, and you've been talking a lot about frequency and vibration, and consciousness. And Roger, we had a nice chat about that last week about the importance of frequency, and resonant frequency and vibrations and
Mhm.
how important consciousness is to everything. And I think it plays such a humongous role in all of this stuff that we call, matters of the unexplained. And I think while there is going to be a science behind it, I think there's also going to be, we're going to learn things about consciousness that maybe maybe most people, if not, us, have just never even considered about how big of a role consciousness, frequency, and vibration play into not necessarily figuring everything out, but just, being able to open our eyes a little more, if that
Right.
makes any sense. I'm sure
I
I'm
agree.
probably talking talking nonsense.
No,
Roger,
I
tell me to
totally,
shut up, man.
I totally agree. I really believe that. That's the key to understanding our reality, you know.
Yeah.
I see the world in a whole different light from my time on the ranch, and it's a positive. Of course, I went through trials and tribulations out there. You know, I say to people, you know, if you stare at darkness long enough, the darkness will stare back. And if
Absolutely.
if you project darkness and fear, you're going to get that result. If you project light and positivity, you're going to get that result. And that's something I learned a lot at the ranch as well. You know, so I put that in perspective every single day. I'm walking this plane of existence. So I totally understand what you're saying.
Did you, any of the times that you were on the ranch, did you ever encounter anything that you felt was of a malevolent nature?
Um, I think the first year out there, and it might have been my own fear playing into it, you know,
Hmm.
because the first year out there, we had a secondary officer, which is great, and we did a lot of walking around at night. And actually, the first year into the second year in 2011, we went to one person out there. So for one, imagine yourself one person out there with the task of securing the property, collecting evidence, doing all the stuff you were supposed to do.
Hmm.
And then, you know, I used to spend months, weeks, years inside Homestead 2, sitting in a lawn chair with the EVP recorder, trying to make contact with the phenomena out there, with what we want to, what was ever out there. But that was part of our job, was to do that.
Hmm.
And doing that alone, truly alone, with no cell service and nobody around, just the dogs, really was a mind melter at times. You know, it really
I
was,
can believe
because
it.
it wasn't so much of just like being in that room in the darkness and feeling the wind come through the back window on your neck, but also in your mind on a security aspect. You're like, okay, if I'm here at Homestead 2, can I get to the east gate quickly if some trespassers get on the property and do something malicious? And how would I even know if they're on the property? And how I would know is I would watch the dogs very closely and pick up on them. If they alerted, then I would alert. But as far as darkness, I think the only time there's been a couple times I've been scared to death out there, but one time in particular was with the wolf experience that I had while I was out there. I felt like I was being hunted, you know, and
Mhm.
then always the sensation of feeling you're being watched was always out there. But it wasn't until probably year, you know, 4, 5, 6, where the ranch became like a second home. I had no more fear. I can walk anywhere on the property at night, unarmed, armed, didn't matter. I had a mutual respect to the property. That's when I would start sleeping at night with the dogs and stargaze. I mean, there was so many cool experiences like that. So it was kind of bittersweet when the ranch was sold, because I had so much time invested, and I didn't want to. I felt like I was getting close to something, like on the cusp of discovering something big. And I did have some major discoveries out there on my own, finding the caves and the artifacts and other areas of interest and some of the experiences I had out there, you know.
Mhm.
You would think I'd have like a whole list of experiences, but I don't. I really have a small few that I would consider very valid, you know.
Mhm.
But the darkness was out there a couple times. There was one time specifically. You want me to mention a specific time where
Sure,
that
sure.
was?
Yeah.
There was one time in the fall, and I was just telling this story to a buddy of mine at work, because he watches the TV show and always has questions for me about stuff. But and
Mhm.
he asked that same question: when did you feel fear out there? And I said, well, a couple times, but there was one time I was at Homestead 2, and this particular night I decided to drive down there using the Highlander truck that we had, because it was super cold that night, and the dogs. It was so cold the dogs didn't even want to come with me on patrol. They stayed in their little igloos at Homestead 1, didn't come with me. So that's how cold it was.
Right.
And so I just got in the vehicle and I drove down to the homesteads and did a sweep of the property, make sure there was no trespassers or whatever, you know, and also to look to see if anything was going on. And I got to Homestead 2, and I parked the vehicle, and I started walking back to the backside of Homestead 2, and I was facing the southern tree line, and I felt this overwhelming feeling of guilt and like darkness, like a pit in my stomach, like something said, "Get the hell out of there." So it was the fall, and there's leaves all over the place. So I turned around and started making my way back to the truck, and I got probably halfway to the truck, and I heard a big rustling of leaves coming from behind me, and I thought in my mind like a big predator was coming up on me. That's what it sounded like. I mean, it sounded like something big was coming up on me. And when I turned around to kind of draw down on it, there was nothing there. And I just kind of froze. And I can feel something was there, but I could not see it. And I just kind of backed up real slow to the truck and got in. I said, I'm done for the night. And that kind of tripped me out, for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, I
And
can
then the
imagine.
wolf experience as well. And then I've had a couple of pretty, and then on another level, not paranormal, but on a security standpoint, there was a time out there where we got intel that a local out of Roosevelt had plans to come out to the ranch and kill one of us to prove that we were hybrids. So there was a rumor going around that we were cursed because we lived out there and worked out there. So they were going to come out and kill us to prove that we're immortal or something like that. And
Right.
so you always have this in the back of your mind, like, okay, who am I going to encounter out here? What am I going to do? So you're always operating in the red zone the whole time you're out there. It's kind of exhausting.
Oh, I can believe that. I mean, you've got some very, and I think people oftentimes probably don't realize that there's a very, existential threat from other human beings.
Right.
I mean, Caleb has told us of a number of times when they've had some people that have tried getting onto the property and making
Yeah.
all kinds of unreasonable requests and things like that. And then of course you've also got the wildlife. I mean, you've got
Mhm.
some in that part of Utah, there are some pretty good sized predator animals. You got
There's mountain lions
mountain
out there.
lions.
Yep.
Yeah, you got mountain lions. I'm not sure how much of bear country it's in, but I know in the Uintas, you get bears in the Uintas, and
There's bears out there.
and then there's also the phenomenon known as res dogs, right?
Oh yeah.
You get feral dogs that hunt in packs and that go around
Yeah.
together, and so there's I always get a kick out of it when people ask, Dragon, well, why are you carrying firearms? What do you think you do? Going to shoot a ghost? And it's like, you don't realize that there's
Yeah.
plenty of very real world threats that
Right.
firearm is there, and it's a necessity to have with them at all times. So
For
it's
sure. For
and I'm
sure. Absolutely. You're on a reservation out there as well. And there's a lot of, there's no rules out there. It's kind of wild,
right,
wild west. So you got to be
yeah,
prepared.
yeah,
But yeah, you're right. You're 100% right.
yeah. It's I've it's funny, Chris, because and Roger, I'll let you chime in on this as well. I've told Caleb, I don't want to go to the ranch. If I ever was invited to the ranch, I don't know if I would accept, simply because I'm not afraid of anything that would happen to me. I
Right.
genuinely have no fear of anything happening to me if I were to go on the ranch. What I would be afraid of is bringing something home that might start, messing with my wife or my children.
Yes.
And so because of that, my wife, because she's read all the stories, right? So she's like, I don't ever want you going out there. So I myself, again, it's not because I have a fear of what may happen to me if I were out there.
Right.
Um, but Roger, I know you're different, right?
Yeah, I think as I think about it and the different stuff that you've said, Chris, kind of reminds me of just your natural curiosity into, um, as I guess with your background and your credentials and the different experiences that you've had, you're curious, you investigate, you want to gain more knowledge and understand that, and you're willing to immerse yourself into that. And I think I'm similar in the way that, if I had the opportunity to go out there, it would be a humbling experience for me. I would want to go out there for the sake of just me learning more about what is there and preserving that history and, making my own, I guess, discoveries as well. Not that I have, super big desire, like, oh, I really want to go out there and I want to be there. I'm happy to be on the sideline and, you know, understand and learn, like from your experiences or talking to Caleb or others who have had direct things on the ranch or those experiences. So from that standpoint, um, yeah, it would be exciting. I think that there would be just some natural fears as well,
Oh
but
yeah.
I think very much so. I'm curious to learn more.
Right. And then part of that is jumping into the fray to learn. You have to jump into it sometimes, you
Yeah.
know, and that's kind of what I did, just jumped right in. Um, it's funny when every time I go back out there, I feel like it's waiting for me to come back out there, you know, like, oh, you're here. And then
Yeah.
there's so much things I could show the team. So every time I go out there, I try to show them stuff that I forgot to show them the last time. Because when I go out there, we get caught up on all the new, because, you know, for me, uh, to see all the stuff that they have now, the tech and the cameras and just the support, it blows my mind out the
Sure.
water. Like, I can't even believe all
Yeah.
the stuff that they've gathered, all the data they've collected. And it's overwhelming for me to be like, holy cow, you've got so much data here. I had no idea. But even with all the data, every time I go out there, I still provide pretty interesting insight to some areas that are areas of interest for sure, of some of my own experiences, you know. And it's kind of cool, you know, to see everything kind of come together because there's so many different layers on that ranch. And that's why I've said before, you know, the ranch is bigger than a TV show. It's bigger than my photography. It's bigger than a government contract. There's real history out there. And when
Right.
you understand that history and you tap into it, you're going to start to uncover, you know, some of the things. And from my perspective, I didn't have all the fancy equipment and stuff. So I had to do things old school, you know.
Right.
And so when I see watch the show and I talk to the guys offline, and it blows my mind some of the stuff that they find out there. It's kind of cool, you know.
Yeah, I have, so I'm curious, with all the, I guess your background and everything that you've experienced, in your bio, you mentioned that, let's see, you've always been interested in the paranormal aspect of things since high school,
Yeah.
and then got the crash course of paranormal when you took a job, working on an old farmstead. As a child, what do you think shaped kind of your, I guess, the path that you took in life that, what made you interested in the paranormal in the first place? What made you
Yeah.
inquisitive and curious?
I think all of us can relate to this because all of us in this conversation have grown up with the 50, 60 years or 40 years of alien, UFO, paranormal pop culture, you know.
Yep.
And kind of like Brandon Fugel, how he's big into all the 80s movies and stuff. I was right there into them as well, you know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind and
Mhm.
all Goonies and everything that's, you know, related to our culture is, you know, growing up in that environment. But for me personally, it was my teachings from my mother, who taught me how to meditate when I was like 12 years old, 7, 8. It was when I was really young. And the teachings of some of the Native American stuff that she, you know, talked about growing up on a reservation herself. And then kind of being open to the idea of it always as a kid. And then later on, working at that old homestead farm in Kansas, where it was like a legitimate poltergeist haunting limestone building. And I really had no idea if it was real or not until I started working there and having some pretty wild experiences where I was bringing my friends out there, you know, and they were having experiences as well. And I kind of opened my eyes up. But when I got to the path of the Air Force and working for 51 in the DOE, that was never in my deck of cards. Like I had never planned to join the military at all. How I got in the military was my friends had the idea to go join. So we all went. So I drove them to the Armed Forces recruiting station in Wichita, Kansas. And we sat down and I just let them talk. I sat in the back and
Mhm.
they talked to the Marines, Army, Navy, and the Air Force was last. And the Air Force guy was like, hey, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I threw him a curveball and I said, I want to do art. I want to do photography or like graphic design. And he goes, you could be an artist for the Air Force.
Nice.
And that's how he got me hooked. He wasn't lying. He showed me that there was a program, you know.
Mhm.
But he goes, but first you got to be a cop. And I said, okay, cool. So we all of us signed that day to be cops in the Air Force. And that led me down my whole career path of working, you know, in the Nevada desert. You know, I'd always dreamed about doing. So I guess almost like manifestation, like manifesting your own reality. I kind of
Right.
projected that I wanted to work out, and I ended up working out there. So it was, so I kind of believe in manifestation a lot. You manifest your reality, and that's what I basically did. You know, and yeah, but I was always into it, and it's because of the pop culture that we grew up with watching and stuff. It's everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
can also be a negative thing because I think that because we did grow up with that type of culture that we already believe in a narrative that may or may not be true. We don't really know for sure. So
Right.
some people get upset. You just kind of go with, I just go with the flow, basically, you know? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's how I got into it.
Oh, awesome. Amazing.
Yeah, Roger's never had any paranormal experiences before.
I've had way too many myself.
I think, yeah, I remember watching a show with you guys talking about the guy in the black hat, the, the hat man.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
that was kind of a really hard for me to talk about. And
it's tough, man. I mean,
I'm still, because, well, it is, because, you know, when you encounter something that's not supposed to be, that doesn't fit within that little box of what you define as reality, and what you define as being possible, it takes me back to something that Travis Taylor said at the second Phenomenon that Roger and I attended, which is that he sees things all the time that breaks his view and his perception of reality. His reality gets broken. And when I had that particular experience that I talked about last week, that's exactly what I'm still going through right now, because I still don't know how to process it. I don't know what to think about it, other than the fact that I know that it happened to me. And
right.
that's the difference between somebody who's an experiencer versus somebody that's that just simply believes that, things like that are possible.
Yeah.
And I've never had any of the other things. I've never seen UFOs or UAPs. I've never seen anything that would, fall in that realm of the paranormal necessarily. But and with this one, I've now that I've had time to think about it, I'm not even thoroughly convinced that it was necessarily what we would call a shadow person or a shadow being. It was
Mhm.
something, and the thing is, it just fit a lot with the research that Roger and I had been doing about shadow beings and shadow people, and that was the first thing that came to mind when I was telling Roger about my experience. And Roger can tell you, when I told him about my experience, I mean, I was still, a couple days later, I was still pretty shaken up by it, because
Yeah.
it just doesn't fit into what, and the thoughts go through your head. Am I going insane? Am I going crazy? I mean, what the heck is that? I mean, I know I wasn't, taking any, illicit drugs or anything like that, and I don't drink anymore, so was none of the usual suspects, as they would say. And then just so it's like every time I hear somebody talk about when they have an experience, whether they experience a UAP or UFO, or people that claim to have, Sasquatch sightings, I what I've learned is to be a lot more patient when people tell me things, because my experience taught me that, number one, when you see something like that, it kind of breaks your mind. What your eyes are seeing, your mind is saying no, no,
Mhm.
no, this can't be, this kind of thing doesn't happen. And you try to reason it away, you try to rationalize uh what is essentially irrational. It doesn't fit into any rational explanation that I can think of. And I can imagine that some of the experiences that you had, like with the wolf experience, I mean, that
That
eh,
changed my whole perception of reality,
yeah.
that
And
experience.
how did that moment feel for you when you? And I guess that's the question that I asked Caleb as well, is what is that moment like when you went from being a non-experiencer to crossing that threshold and becoming an experiencer? What was that process like internally for you?
Um, it shocked me to the core. Uh, and I was already kind of in the belief system to begin with, but
Mhm.
this event seemed way more powerful than other ones I've had experiences with. Because the first week I was at the ranch in Utah, I wrote the place off as a joke. I really did. Because I'm from the country, born and raised, we raised horses. I live out in the middle of the woods, grew up that way.
Mhm.
So going to the ranch felt like being back at home. And I noticed that some of the guys on the team were from cities like LA and stuff. So going to the ranch for them felt like they're on an alien planet, which was probably responsible for some of the stories and
Right.
mythos. Not saying that their stories were wrong or not real, but I think they may have misinterpreted some of the situations. But
Right.
for me, that second week where I had the wolf experience, and I could talk about it in detail if you want, it kind of flipped me around to like, what the heck is going on out here?
Mhm.
And then I was like, okay, this is something else is going on out here, and it caught my attention very well. And then after that moment, I kind of really took a step back and became more of a patient observer with situations. And then that's where my photography kind of came on, because I used my photography to kind of catalog events, because we had cameras out there too, but my own personal camera took just better quality pictures, and I almost used it as a shield, like to take a picture. It kind of felt like it gave me some type of buffer, you know.
Right.
And yeah, it rocked me to my core, and I had to second guess a lot of things. Even to this day, I think about that event every single night, or every single, not every night, but I think about it a lot.
Mhm.
What was really going on? What the hell was it? And it did happen at the Triangle area, where it all
Wow.
really kind of went. And which is crazy, because now the TV show talks about the Triangle area a lot. And during my timeline, we just referred to it as the curve. That was it. We didn't call it the triangle. James Keenan has a very interesting theory about that as well. But that's where that event took place, where we saw the wolf, was at the triangle.
Mhm.
It was very bizarre. Do you want me to talk about the event from the start? Or
Yeah, that
Sure.
would be great.
Sure. That'd be great.
so, like I said, the second week I was out there, another officer came up to relieve the other officer. So we had overlapping layers of officers. So the second week, I was like, this place is a joke.
Mhm.
It's a ranch, and so we had a routine where one guy would go out for a daily run and get an eyes on the property, while the other guy did the report that went to the Pentagon or went to the upper chain.
Mhm.
And the guy came back from the run. He goes, "Hey man, I found some weird prints on the mesa. Come take a look." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean weird?" He's like, "I seen some big wolf print," or he said big wolf prints. I'm like, okay, let's go take a look. So we walk up the mesa and we find these big canine prints, wolf. Later on, we get them validated, the wolf or some type of large canine, and they dwarfed our dog. At the time we had two full-grown labs and a border collie, and these prints dwarfed our labs prints.
Mm.
And what made it weird is that these prints, it looked like they were on 4 feet and then on 2 feet, and then on 4 feet and then on 2 feet, like it was walking on fours and then walking on twos and then walking on fours. And that's how it
Wow.
looked. And I took a ruler and I threw the ruler down, and it measured a 3 foot gap, or a 3 foot stride. So this animal had a 3 foot stride. And I'm like, and I think I might have sent you some pictures of that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what the hell is this? So we're still assuming that, okay, it's some type of big canine. So we call our chain of command, let them know, and their advice is, hey, be careful, but document as best you can. So that
Mhm.
night we went out with the mindset. I know this sounds stupid, but everybody who was out there were all military veterans. So you're
Mhm.
working with your own element of guys. So we had this mindset: we're going to go capture this big wolf or whatever, whatever it was.
Right.
So we go out that night, and I'll never forget this. It was a full moon night in October. It was nice and cold out, a little bit of cloud cover, and we go out that night with the dogs. And we can tell right off the bat the dogs were super nervous. They were looking at us like something was off, and they were staying next to us when normally they would be out trying to catch rabbits and stuff, or ground mice and stuff the whole night. But this night in particular, they were glued to our hip, basically. So we
Mm.
knew something was up. So we went out and we made some campfires around the property. We made a campfire by Homestead 2, and then one later further down by the West Gate, to try to draw this animal in, whatever it was.
Mhm.
And it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's starting to rain a little bit. So we're like, okay, let's pack it up and head back to Homestead 1, because that's where we slept at.
Right.
And so we started backtracking our tracks from that night, and we found wolf prints behind our tracks.
Oh,
So
wow.
this thing was stalking us the
I was gonna
whole
say
time.
sounds like a stalking. Yeah.
Yeah, and the dogs never picked up on it, like alerted. And so at that moment, we're like, okay, we need to get back to Homestead 1 quickly. So we're got on the main road and we're walking and we get to the bend where the triangle's at. And
Mhm.
I'm probably about 50 paces ahead of my partner. And he says, "Stop, I heard something." He goes, "Stop, I hear something." And there's a ditch that runs through the property. It runs through the triangle. It's a ditch. In October, it's mostly dry. But where this animal was at, there was the mesa and a big field. So whatever was following us would get exposed eventually.
Right.
So I walk and he said, "Stop." And I turn around. And as I turn around, the clouds went over the moon and everything just felt like I was walking in water. Like it felt like time compressed as I'm turning around to say, "What?" And out of the ditch behind my partner, I hear this, we both hear this guttural growl howl like I've never heard before in my life. Deep, bellowing growl, howl. And then out of the ditch jumps this big black wolf or large canine, probably about the size of a deer. It was big,
Oh,
lands
wow.
on the road and heads west. And the dogs go after the animal. We go after the dogs, thinking that the dogs are going to tussle with this wolf and get torn to shreds. And
Mhm.
we're running behind it. And basically, we lost sight of it and it disappeared. And the dog, what made it weird is the dogs stopped on a dime. Like they just stopped and looked at us with their eyes like, "What was that?" And I'm looking at them like, "What the hell was that?" So we beat feet back to Homestead One and do the report. Now it's like 4 o'clock in the morning and we're pretty pinged out. Like, what the hell was that?
Mhm.
And I remember in the initial report, I was so paranoid about losing my Q clearance that I had the officer write that I didn't see the wolf, in the
Mhm.
report because I was scared. I was like, I'm going to lose my clearance. This is some weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
So that happened in 2010. So now fast forward
Wow.
2015. 2015, I'm out there alone on the ranch. And now by 2015, I'm secure at the property. Even with that experience, I felt okay. I didn't feel like I didn't feel like this thing was gonna attack us. It had the chance to attack us, and it never
Yeah.
did. But I felt like it was trying to get our attention. So now it's 2015. I'm out there alone. I'm on a lawn chair at the East Gate now with the dogs. And at this time, now we have Will, who's on the TV show. He's the last of the dogs. So
Well, yeah.
William is there with us, with me by myself. I'm at the gate on a lawn chair, just kind of looking at the area. I'm kind of on my phone because at the East Gate is where you can get a little bit of cell service. So I
Mhm.
try to catch up on text messages right there at the East Gate while looking for trespassers and stuff. And behind me, my back is facing the mesa, and I hear that guttural howl growl like I heard in 2010 come directly behind me. And I come off the chair, spin, draw my gun out as I'm falling back into the dirt. And the dogs go after the wolf, or whatever it was, and then come directly back. I get to my feet and I scan the area and I couldn't see what it was or and then I had to walk a quarter mile back to the trailer down the long road where there's trees on both sides. Like I'm
Oh,
gonna get
wow.
flanked by this beast, whatever. So I was like, oh my God. Like as soon as I had my guard down, that's when it happened. And
Right.
that was my basically the wolf experience. Now, could it have been just a wolf? I guess, but it makes me interested now where the triangle's at, the overlap. Like James Keenan has a theory that there's a magnetic anomaly down in the earth there, which creates this overlapping layers of time, the past, present, future. So maybe we intertangled somehow where I saw this thing and it saw me.
I
So I don't
I
have.
was I was actually, before you mentioned James Keenan's theory, that's precisely where my mind went, was something
Mhm.
just like that.
Yeah.
We hear about these accounts of, it seems that, well, we already know from one of the experiments that there's at least some kind of a time dilation or a time slip. Even it was a really small amount of time, wasn't it, Raj? Like a quarter of a second or something like that.
Right.
Nanosecond,
And
something like that. It
yeah,
was like,
but
but that's huge, I guess.
it
And
was, yeah, and it was measurable. So there's got to be something either electromagnetic or gravitic, some kind of gravitational anomaly.
Right.
And so that's those are the kind of things that really kind of get me going, is thinking about how the ranch, and going clear back to ancient times, was one of those places where it's just a naturally occurring for want of a better term, a grand central station where different times or different dimensions just tend to kind of meet together at
Yeah.
Interlace, yeah.
that one geological
Yep.
location, and that's what really fascinates me, because there's a lot of legends and mythologies out there among all kinds of ancient people where there are naturally occurring places that are like that.
Yeah.
And like we've already talked about, there is just now Roger and I have never set foot on the ranch, but we've been close to it and we've been in the basin. And again, there's just a different energy when you get
Mhm.
in the basin. And the fact that a lot of these things that happened or are alleged to have happened out on the ranch, you still see the UAPs and UFOs and the reports of skinwalkers all throughout the basin, not just simply
Right.
confined to the fence line of Skinwalker Ranch.
Right.
So um, it definitely makes me wonder. And again, it circles back to the importance of learning the traditions, I think, of the ancient peoples, because if we don't at least take into account and make the effort to learn what
Mhm.
their history is and what their viewpoint is, then um, it's not being very scientific. Because if you're
Right.
really truly being scientific about things, you have to consider, you know, everything. And if you're not challenging your views of what the scientific, method or scientific viewpoints are, you're kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're
Yeah.
throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as they say,
I agree.
which is
And back in
why,
that time, and back in that timeline, those people didn't have scientific equipment to measure the data or collect the data. They went there, uh, were a natural observer and spiritually evolved with that phenomenon. And we're kind of doing the opposite, where we want to get the scientific data first, so
right?
that way we can have control of what we don't know. That's kind of the key of it. But in reality, just spiritually go out there and be a patient observer and evolve with what you're experiencing is probably going to get more personal knowledge than data collecting. That's kind of the difference.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree. I think again, for me, it comes down to those three things: consciousness, frequency, and vibration. And
Mhm.
I think we already know that nature has different varying degrees of resonance and vibration, and it makes me wonder. And of course, I'm not a scientist of any kind. I'm a Raiders fan. I can barely put two coherent sentences together at times, but um, I think that I tend to believe that there are other dimensions that are out there. I think it's a very natural thing, and I think that I think the predominant life form in the universe is consciousness, if that makes any sense.
That does make
Um,
sense.
I mean, I think that we look for quote unquote life in verifiable physical aspects, but I think that real life, what makes us us, us as individuals, our personalities, because my belief is that when we die, we take our knowledge, we take the love that we have for those that we've loved in this life. Those are the things that we take with us. And I
Mhm.
think that spirit, that soul, that essence, that energy, that life force, that consciousness continues on after we experience, this thing called physical death. And I think that if we were able to see and perceive what consciousness is, then I think we would be likely to find out that we are surrounded by life in the form of consciousness. And maybe that's why we can't see some of this phenomena, is because it is part of a consciousness. It is a consciousness of its own. And just as we can't, you know, we don't know, are these things made up of matter, but just of some kind of really fine matter that it requires a certain frequency to be able to see it with our eyes, kind of thing? Or, it's these are the things that keep me keep me up
Well,
at night when I
like
when I think about this
a,
stuff.
a quote from the Lakota. The Lakota have a quote. It says, there is no such thing as death, only a changing of worlds."
Right.
And I kind of I believe that there is no such thing as death. You have to accept that, and there's only a changing of worlds. So
I
I kind
firmly,
of
I
I
firmly
believe
Yeah,
believe
that.
that.
agree.
Yeah. And I, we hear these legends from a lot of the Native American tribes, and I'm sure you've probably heard some of them, Chris, that there are people that have the gift of being able to what they call walk in two worlds,
Oh yeah.
which is, you're a person who's living, and it's not always necessarily a medicine man or a medicine woman. It's people sometimes have the blessing, or some would say the curse, of being able to see in momentarily at least, or in some ways, literally walk in some of those other dimensions and experience things that are truly, indescribably uh, beautiful, and in some instances indescribably horrifying. Um,
Right.
so I think that when we hear these stories about, people that can walk in two worlds, as it were, I think it's true. In fact, Rogers even had an experience where I think he had something like that happen to him on one of the bizarre incidents that happened to him not too long ago. So I think that part of what Skinwalker Ranch is, again, is I think what we're going to learn out there, if we learn anything, is going to be that the world around us is not limited to what we can just see with our normal eyesight and with our normal five senses. I think that the world and the universe around us is a lot bigger, and there's a lot of things that we can't see that are there. And I think that's it's a pretty exciting thing to think about, that we may be, learning, getting some kind of actual verifiable proof that is indeed the case. Because I believe in all these old legends. I believe that there's
Sure.
something to them. I don't think that these people's traditions would have been passed down all these years if there wasn't something to it. Um, human beings can be pretty resilient creatures, and if you set yourself a belief system based off of the things that you experience, like these ancient people did, um, why would we? What kind of logic would dictate that all of a sudden that's going to just change overnight?
Right.
Just because we now have science, and again, I'm not trying to poo-poo any kind of science or say that I'm a science denier of any kind. It's just that I
Right.
think that you need to have an open mind and an open approach to all this, because all these things that back in the ancient times were considered magic is just, and like the whole term supernatural and paranormal, it's just simply science that we don't understand.
Right.
And I think that's, at least that's how I process all of it anyway. I
Mhm.
may be completely wrong, but I just try to keep an open mind about as much of it as I can. And now that I've had my own experience, I know what it's like to really experience something and see something that just that I don't know where to begin to explain what really happened, other than to say that it did happen. And so when I see people that encounter these kinds of things, and like you were talking with the wolf, I mean, I can't imagine the adrenaline you had rushing through you at that time, and gosh, especially out there on the ranch, where you're kind of exposed out there, and if you're dealing with a wolf or something like that you're kind of in its playground, as it were.
Oh
You're in
yeah.
you're in its backyard, so uh it has the advantage no matter how you look at it. And
Yeah, that's why I say the ranch isn't entertainment for me because
yeah,
it was very real. The sacrifices, being out there alone, sitting in that lawn chair day in, day out, all this. I take that place very serious, it's not a place to meddle with, really.
yeah.
So
What is
it's
tell us a little bit about the investigations you've done out at like Mount Wilson and whatnot. Now
yeah,
Roger and I, we got to meet Carl the first year at Phenomicon, and
yeah,
I still have not had a chance to have a conversation with him, because we tried to, I tried talking to him and saying, hey, I've watched your show on YouTube, and he was kind of like, thanks. so so it's
yeah,
like, he seems like a really, really interesting, really cool guy.
yeah.
And the
He's
stuff that
awesome.
I know he's doing out there on Mount Wilson, I just find it so fascinating. So tell us a little bit about what you've done out there.
Yeah, yeah, me and Carl have been kind of, he was asked by the owner out there to come out there and take a look at his property. I don't think a lot of people know this, but Bigelow owned Mount Wilson Ranch before Skinwalker Ranch. So that
Hmm.
the inception to this whole conversation starts with Hal Puthoff and Project Stargate being defunded in 1995, and then NIDS being formed in 95, 96, starting at Mount Wilson first, and then eventually going to Skinwalker Ranch. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so Mount Wilson's got a ton of history. There's a huge Native American presence out there at one time. It's also close to Area 51.
I was
It
going to
was
say
also,
that's pretty
yeah,
close to Rachel, isn't it?
it's right down the street, you know, I forgot how
Wow.
many, like an hour, hour and a half away from the gate from 51. Um, on top of that, that location was picked for the Reagan during the Star Wars program. That
Hmm.
location was
Right.
picked to set up a missile defense system. And what happened was when they went out there and started digging around, they uncovered a massive historical site out there with the Native American stuff that they were pulling off the mountain, and that
Oh,
shut
wow.
down the whole operation. And then Bigelow bought the property, and NIDS was started out there, and then they conducted experiments out there using sound and light frequencies as well. And eventually they go to Skinwalker. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff out there, a lot of history. And what's cool is that people can go out there at Mount Wilson and stay the night out there. It's actual, there's a
Mhm.
place, there's like, they have rooms available for people to go hike and hang out there and meet the owner. And it's a really cool spot. I'm supposed to be going out there again this summer with Carl and doing some more stuff. So I look
Nice.
forward to it. It's an awesome spot.
Gosh, yeah, I know Jeff Freeman talked about wanting to go out there, and Jeff was
Oh,
like,
he said,
Jim, come with me. And I'm like, "Oh, I want to go."
yeah. I mean,
So,
it's a real positive out there. It's, Skinwalker, it's got a little negative energy to it there. It just does.
mhm.
Blind Frog Ranch has more, it feels more positive out there, but Mount Wilson, I felt great out there. I felt
Hmm,
wonderful. And not many people know also when it comes to well, you might know that you went to Basin right there with Blind Frog and Skinwalker. In that location, when I talk about indigenous history, you also have the Walker Wars that happened out there and the Black
right.
Hawk Wars. The
Hmm.
Black Hawk Wars that went on for almost 7 years, where I think 20% of the Ute population survived that conflict. That all happened in that basin. So that frequency, energy, and vibration is displaced in that natural environment, and that's where
Hmm.
the artifacts come into point, and are things to be taken or like, viewed very seriously. There's a lot of history out there. But yeah,
Hmm.
you should definitely, if you get a chance to go to Mount Wilson, I would hit it up. It's beautiful out there. It's a lot of fun.
I keep telling Raj that he and I got to go out to Rachel, Nevada, because I went out there. One of my favorite memories of recent times is shortly after my mom passed. My dad was really kind of heartbroken over the passing of my mom, so we packed him up one weekend and drove him up to we stayed in Mesquite, Nevada, because
Mhm.
I love Mesquite. It's a great place to stay if you want to go to Vegas. Stay in Mesquite because it's a heck of a lot cheaper.
Yes.
They've actually got some great stuff in Mesquite to do. But
Oh yeah.
we stayed in Mesquite, and we drove up to up 93 there and onto 375 and through Alamo and all that, and got to Rachel. And my dad never told me that one of his bucket list trips was he wanted to be able to go to Area 51. And obviously we didn't drive down the road with the mailbox or anything like that, but
Right.
we drove to the little alien, and we had a great conversation with the folks that were working there. And my dad, after months of seeing him, just in complete heartbreak over the loss of my mom, it was the first time I'd actually seen him, smile and grin from ear to ear because he was having so much fun just
That's
looking
great.
at all the stuff they had on the walls and listening to all the stories. and
Mhm.
and so it's a really, Raj, it's a really cool trip. You and I got to do it sometime. I got to take you out there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. And then, yeah, my understanding was that Mount Wilson's not too far away from where Rachel is. So
Not far at all. Yeah, it's right down the road. It's a cool spot. Very cool spot indeed.
right on. So I have to ask, when your time at Area 51, you said Janet detail. Would that be the Janet Airlines
Mhm.
detail?
Yeah, I
right?
got hired with 51 as escort duty first,
Uh-huh.
and then ended up working the Janet detail in Las Vegas for for 51. It was the company that had, I won't say the name, but it was that company that had a contract at the time. And but at the same time I was working for 51, I was also working for Bass, but Bass didn't know that I was a 51 employee because obviously you can't tell people.
Right,
But
right.
I had a brand new baby on the way, so I was trying to find whichever job paid the most, and
Hmm.
yeah, it was a pretty wild,
So you
wild
you
time.
you weren't employed by Whack and Hut while you were out there, right?
I was employed with Whack and Hunt when I worked for the DOE.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes, I was a
Okay.
WSI, Whack and Hunt Service Incorporation. I worked for Whack and Hunt when I worked for the DOE as a security police officer out there.
Oh,
So
nice.
yes, and and getting the Q clearance and stuff. And I just watched that American Conspiracy documentary on Netflix, and I was like, they're talking about Whack and Hunt. I'm like, oh man. I mean, look, there's a reason why Nevada is 86% owned by the government. There's a lot of stuff
Right.
that goes on out there.
Oh, yeah.
And but yeah, I worked for Wackenhut. I got a coin from Wackenhut, as a matter of fact. Now people are going to think that I'm the enemy now, but that's not the case. It's
No,
a good
you
job.
you you were not one of the camo dudes, right?
Yes, I was actually.
You were. Oh, wow. How about that?
Yes,
Interesting. That's
so
that's
that's why
cool.
I have a kind of different perception when it comes to some of this UFO stuff. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's it's most likely our technology, but people don't like to hear that. So whatever. I mean, I have
Yeah.
a very
Well,
interesting career. So
you got to figure that, and this is another thing that I found just in posting the videos that Roger and I have. There's a lot of people that don't believe that the United States government has a right to keep certain secrets, and
absolutely, yeah,
it's like, you really truly that naive to believe
yeah,
that we want to keep everything as an open book? Because we really do have adversaries out there that would just love to have the opportunity to uh,
Oh yeah.
get a leg up on us technologically, and would
you
love
have no
to
idea.
bring us to our knees in any way that they can. So it's I have to, that's why I don't, neither Roger or myself consider us to be part of the UFO Twitter and the, I mean, we're on there, and yes, I look at it every day, but I look at the standpoint that, probably a significant number of UFO and UAP sightings is likely to be some kind of secret technology. And that's not something to be scared about. I mean,
History,
we,
history proved that.
yeah, I mean, how many years were they flying the SR-71 and the U-2, which was developed and tested out there at Groom Lake? And, and the stealth fighters, we already know. I mean, living here in Utah, I've got all kinds of friends from Southern Utah that were like, oh, heck yeah, we used to see them, test flying the F-117 and the B-1 or the B-2. And it's like, we always thought that it was UFOs, and it's like, no, not really.
Yeah,
But you know what? If that's what, and to that end, you can kind of understand why the government would kind of be okay with letting some people glom onto that,
of course.
you know, extraterrestrial and space aliens thing. When the reality is, we have, the need to do weapons research and to do weapons testing, and we have air superiority, right? The United States maintains air superiority throughout the world. Why would we want to kind of just sit on our ass and become complacent about things like that? Because do you honestly think that the Russians or the Chinese or the North Koreans or the Iranians are just simply saying, well, I guess we're okay with being number two or number three? I mean, that's
Yeah,
just
air power global dominance is the objective. Everything else is a distraction. And the best way that's achieved is by keeping everyone in the dark, to
right.
include our own allies and adversaries, to include members of Congress, to include military observers as well. It's super secret for a reason. And the espionage aspect is totally overlooked, and it's something
Hmm.
very serious.
Right.
Um, having been on that side of the fence, I totally understand it. And yeah, but it's best kept. The best way it's achieved is by keeping everyone in the dark. If
Right.
we don't want to deploy these toys unless we have to deploy these toys out. And look what's
Exactly.
happened already. Just in the last, I would say, 2 years, you have the B-21 Raider being released, right?
Right.
You have Project Skyborg being released, which is AI drone technology attached to fighter warfare. And then you have the new Lockheed commercial that came out like a couple months ago, where they talk about nanotube technology, where aircraft can shapeshift, and it's like they're telling you, hey, this is the stuff that we have right now, since everybody's making a big fuss of it. But what are they not telling you? There's probably better tech out there that
Right.
is on the back burner, you know. But so a lot of it, yes, you said, like, it is our technology for sure.
Well, it's just a simple line, you know, loose lips sink ships, you know. There's a
True.
reason why they have to compartmentalize everything. And again, I don't come from, you know, an intelligence background. I don't have any family that, you know, worked in any of that. It's just it's common sense. You know, there's a need to keep certain secrets. And, you know, having said that, do I believe that there is possible instances, as David Grush alleges, that there has been retrievals from stuff that is quote unquote non-human? Of course, I got to keep an open mind about that. But at the same time, if that stuff is real, it would make sense why they would keep it clamped down so hard, right? Because something like that, you're dealing with, you know, news that could literally, I mean, imagine what would happen if news dropped tomorrow that we are not alone on this planet. We've been visited, we're currently being visited. I mean, what kind of effect would that have on the financial markets? What kind of an effect would that have on the world's religions that are not set up to be able to account for there being something other than humans? You know, you know, unfortunately, there are religions out there that believe that we are the be all end all in the universe as human beings. And you know, so there's a reason why you would have to believe that if these things do exist, that David Grush and other whistleblowers are coming forward with. My whole reaction is don't jump to any conclusions. Just let it play out. Let it see where it goes. And the way I feel is that if proof does come out that there has been non-human craft with non-human occupants, that doesn't scare me. It fits into my worldview. It fits into what I believe about the universe, and it really wouldn't change a whole lot for me about my day-to-day activities. But at the same time, I understand why there would be a need to maintain such a kind of secrecy. And I'm sure you probably know all about the importance of maintaining that security clearance and all that. And I wouldn't expect you to
Absolutely.
comment on anything anyway. So, but it's just cool to think that, you know, again, it plays into that whole my whole belief that the world we live in is a much bigger place and a much more fascinating place, I think, than any of us truly realize. And I think what we're going to learn, if there is anything to be gained out of all this, is that we have a lot more in common with ourselves as human beings, with each other, and I think we got more. We're going to find we have more in common with you know, other life that's out there in the universe. And I don't think that we should be looking at it as that we're the only game in town, if that
I
makes
agree.
sense. So, and Roger, it looks like you've got something to say.
No, no, I subscribe to the same thing. There's a lot we don't know, and it's always good to keep an open mind. And you know, I think it's great to ask a lot of questions and form opinions and ask more questions because we're always in search of the truth. And but at the same time, right? Like there's, you know, with knowledge comes a lot of power as well, and that's the kind of thing where, you know, you have to make responsible decisions and ensure that what we have and what we understand, right? So we can keep going forward and learning more and more and just taking those steps. So,
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything that you've ever heard about S4 out there, or is that like Bob Lazar's story? Is he?
Well, I heard that, well, you know, before Bob Lazar became public, people should realize that there was, I think, over 10,051 employees that worked there before him. So
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting that he's the one that whistleblows versus the other 10,000 employees. So as for, I mean, the Tonopah Test Range has an area called S4 out there where the 117s were developed as well.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, working for the Nevada test site, there's locations out there where you really don't know what's going on. You know, even I don't even know. But also my line of work, and this is important, people should understand. any PL1 resource, priority level 1 resource, whether that be F-117 or advanced aircraft or nuclear weapons, is protected by a human element with a weapon.
Right.
Every single asset that we have. So assuming that alien aircraft would definitely be a PL1 resource, it would be protected by a human element.
Mm-hmm.
So that human element are people that I know very well of individuals. So as much as with my background professionally, I still want to believe in a lot of these stories and things, you know, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep an open mind to the whole thing, but
Yeah.
also keep myself grounded to my professional of where I've been worked at. And I think that's important too, because it really doesn't matter how many PhDs you have or titles you have over your head, if you're a Air Force pilot or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That those titles, you could be the smartest person in the room. When it
Mm-hmm.
comes to this subject, it really boils down to where have you physically worked at. If you
Right.
haven't worked in that Nevada desert or Dugway Proving Ground or the DOE or 51, then you are just an outsider looking in. You're
Yeah.
just a witness of technology that you were unfamiliar with by what we just discussed earlier about keeping it secret. So
Mm-hmm.
you may want to whistleblow and talk about, oh, I saw this and I'm a pilot, so you think you need to know, but that's all ego driven. You need to take a step back and say, no, you could be a 4-star general and not have a need to know. That's not how the game works.
Right.
Because like you said, espionage is a #1 thing that is overlooked. And our
Mm-hmm.
enemies and our allies are always watching us and
Right.
waiting. As a matter of fact, I can say this publicly, Las Vegas alone has like over 28 different spy agencies every day collecting data on American intel, on American citizens,
Oh, I
hoping
believe
to
it.
meet somebody who works at a test site that gets liquored up at the blackjack table and starts
Mm-hmm.
spilling the beans about a special project, you know. So I always tell people it's less about aliens, it's more about national security that's paramount. But yeah,
Yeah.
you could be the smartest person in the room, but that's great. Tell me where you've worked at. And if it's not in those locations where I know, I'm like, well, then okay, then you're just an observer.
Uh-huh.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that at all. But from my perspective, I when somebody comes onto the scene, the first thing I look at is their background. That's what an investigator does. I hear
Right.
your stories, but I want to find out who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where some of the stuff is like, okay, well, you're just an observer. And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of these stories and mythos come from.
Mm-hmm.
People who have spent their whole career looking over the fence, you know. And I was like that on both sides. I've kind of, you know, played on both worlds, so I get it. I
Yeah.
understand it, you know.
Yeah. No, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there's even stories of President Carter and President Clinton have asked to see all of the quote unquote UFO files before,
Yeah.
and they've been told outright, you don't have a need to know.
Don't need to know.
You haven't been read into the programs,
This,
and you would think the President of the United States is the highest ranking military official in the United States.
yeah,
But if he doesn't have a need to know, he doesn't have a need to know. And what they don't understand as well is that the president is a temporary employee, right? I mean, the
mhm,
longest that president's ever going to sit at 1600 Pennsylvania is 8 years,
yeah,
and that's it.
yeah,
So it's easy to understand where, and how these conspiracy theories and how a lot of the myths and legends get brought up, because there is that legitimate expedient need to compartmentalize and to keep
yeah,
things quiet for national security, because you don't know what kind of guy the president's going to be after he, finishes off his term. What if he
right,
develops Alzheimer's and forgets, oh, I can't talk about this, but then he's doing an interview with, the Today Show, and all of a sudden he spills the beans on this top secret thing that, nobody's supposed to know about. I mean, there's
mhm.
a very justifiable reason why some secrets have to be
And
maintained.
on
And
top of that, if you are an individual who's in the public limelight and you supposedly have all these secrets, you know, our ad, who's to say you're not going to get kidnapped by the Russians or somebody to then extract those information out of you? You
Right.
become a
exactly,
target. You become a
exactly.
target. You become a liability for the United States of America.
Yeah,
And that's something that's, I mean, I've been on both sides of the fence. I understand it very completely. So um,
yeah,
it's just kind of crazy that a lot of stuff is becoming more mainstream and it's cool, but like
Mhm.
the ranch being talked about, it's just it really blows my mind a little bit. But it's here we are.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
It's been a wild ride the last, especially since 2017, because I've always believed that there's life elsewhere in the universe, but
Yeah,
I was never really a firm believer that aliens or any other non-human intelligence had been visiting our planet or would be. And then all that changed with, that 2017 New York Times article. And all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I need to rethink that. And then paying close attention to what a lot of people are saying, how, people like David Grush are not using the term extraterrestrial or ETs or aliens. They're just simply saying non-human intelligence. And again, that's another reason why I'm trying to keep my mind open, because I can't even begin. If you were to ask me what is non-human intelligence, uh, I have no idea how to explain that. I don't know what that means other than what it implies, which is that it's an intelligence that is non-human. It's not
it kind of aligns
not
with our
us.
current AI narrative as well. Like,
Yeah,
people, I've noticed that the conversation has changed from little green men like we grew up with,
right,
hearing and telling stories, to now it's evolved to NHI. Well, also that's kind of evolving with our current AI technology.
right.
Like I talked about Project Skyborg, those are AI drones, unmanned drones that are supporting a human element. So
Hmm.
that would be considered, I guess, some type of NHI.
Right.
Now, where the origins of that technology came from. Did it come from some outside source? I think that's the implications. Is
Yeah,
it possible? Sure, I guess it's possible.
yeah.
DARPA plays a big role in this whole thing, and the
Hmm.
CIA has their own special unit inside of DARPA. So the
Hmm.
CIA is involved in all this narrative, but I think it's kind of funny when the CIA talks about the UFO narrative, we're supposed to believe every word they say when their job is the total opposite,
Right,
of, you know,
right.
it's just
Obfuscation. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, and again, that's all the more important reason I think for us to keep an open mind about it. Because
yeah,
if you put all your eggs in one basket, let's say you're somebody that is just categorically convinced that we're dealing with extraterrestrials, that we're dealing with your stereotypical gray alien, right? And what's going to happen if we find out that that's not at all what this is? What is that going to do to the worldview and to the mental and psychological and emotional well-being of people that put all their eggs in that one basket?
right.
Um, that's going to be a real hard day of reckoning, I think, when that day arrives for people like that. And so that's why as it pertains to this whole subject of, NHI, I keep an open mind. It fascinates me. I mean, I love to speculate as much as the next person, but do I say with any kind of degree of certainty that I think it's categorically this or this or this? And I don't, because it's not a logical way to do it, because you're dealing with an unknown. And
Yeah,
because of that, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And that's that. I try my best not to do that. And I love talking about, Grush in his interviews, and talking about, oh, won't it be great if it ends up being this or this or this. I mean, those are great conversations to have, but I don't dwell on that kind of thing. It doesn't, it's not on my mind 24/7,
right.
because I don't know what it is. And I'm just simply, with all this stuff, I'm just kind of, just just grateful that I'm here to be along for the ride and watch it all unfold. And I don't think there's going to be any one single moment of what they call disclosure. I think that
Yeah, I think
if there is a disclosure to be made, I think it's going to be, maybe it's already started. A lot of people say it's already begun, and I
yeah,
don't think it's going to be just one monumental, the president addressing the nation and saying, "Well, we're not alone." I don't think
yeah.
that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that kind of disclosure is already here. We've had
Yeah,
60 years of the propaganda pop culture, and I think it kind of feels like disclosure is here. Now,
yeah,
it may not be the disclosure that we want to accept, but
hmm,
why do we need the government's approval anyways? We're
right,
waiting for their confirmation, but we're going to only accept the confirmation that we are already invested in. So I think
right,
at the end of the day, when it's all, I think at the end of the day, what's the most important aspect is time. How much time are you willing to invest into this narrative?
Mhm.
And is it creating a positive environment for you personally? And
Right.
if it's not creating a positive environment for you, it's time to detach and just walk away, because time is
Exactly.
what we have. Use it well, spend it wisely, you know?
And man, what a dumpster fire it can be, right? I mean, honestly, I mean, social media just by itself, pick any topic,
Yeah.
especially if you get into the realm of politics,
Oh,
you will see the absolute worst of humanity on display on social media whenever the topics of politics or religion or whatever current hot button social issue people
yeah,
happen to be discussing. And the whole UFO Twitter or UAPX,
yeah,
and of course I have to be careful because remember there was UAPX that Gary Voorhees and
yeah,
and
yeah.
and those other guys started. So it's like now they're starting to refer to UFO Twitter as UAPX, and it's like it's confusing. But
It is.
but that in itself, I mean, look there. I see people on there, and and Roger and I, we specifically don't mention the debunkers by name because they thrive on that kind of thing. So, but there's always people out there that are going to be, taking a little of this, taking this a little too seriously, and they let it control their lives. They let it control their happiness. And when you get to that stage, whether you're talking UFOs or anything else, exactly like you said, Chris, it's time to take a step back and just walk away, even if it's for just a little bit of time to rebalance, refocus yourself. And yeah, I mean that's what we see all the time. I mean, just there's so much division, there's so many armchair quarterbacks, in this
It almost feels like it's by design, you know, it's,
yeah, it does.
divide, distract, conquer. That's a typical tactic,
Hmm.
and it's being
Yep.
played out in some of these arenas, these social media arenas. So I try not to get caught up in it as well. I take a step
Yeah.
back, and I'm kind of at the point now where I feel like I've gotten the closure that I want. I've been to DC now a couple times behind closed
Hmm.
door sessions, and I've said what I've had to say. And the ranch for me is a home that I love going out there and spending time. Any chance I get to go to Utah, I jump on it.
Hmm.
And this next time, I'm taking my kids up there so they can experience it as well.
Great.
And like you said, creating that positive environment is key, and that's something my focus is on. So, but I hear you 100%.
Right on. Yeah, it's I can't remember another time in my life, and I'm over 50, and I don't remember a time in America where we've hated each other this much.
Oh,
And how we want to just simply split everybody up into these little tribalistic, you
yeah,
know, segments. It's like if I happen to be belonging to this political party, then anybody that's on the other side, well, they're not just the enemy. We've got to destroy them and everything that they stand for. And somewhere along the way, we've forgotten that it's okay to disagree with one another. You can still have respect for somebody if you disagree.
right.
And that's a lost art form, I think, that we're experiencing at least in the United States anyway. I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
you know. But one thing I want to end on before we wrap things up here is
Yeah,
you talked at the beginning about you mentioned Melissa Winterton
yeah,
and meditation, and I wanted to mention once again that when I was at Phenomicon this last year, Melissa, she held a sunrise meditation that was really really cool, and it was something that I wanted to get into because I never knew how to meditate. Now, as a member of the religion that I belong to, I pray almost a daily basis, several times a
right.
day. But I didn't know quite how the whole meditation thing worked, and I was looking for a way to be able to rebalance, just find balance in my between my body and my mind, my spirit, and whatever you want to call it. And the thing that blew me away more than anything was how simple and straightforward it was, and
Hmm.
that it was basically a simple matter of me learning how to give permission to myself to access certain parts of my consciousness, certain parts of my mind. And once I figured out how to do that, it had a very profound and
Oh yeah,
lasting impact on me. And I can say with absolute certainty in the months since Phenomicon, and we're in, gosh, it's been 6 months since Phenomicon, going on 7 months now.
Mhm.
And I have had a greater sense of calm, a greater sense of peace. And so for me, even though I don't get to do it as much as I'd like to, meditation completely changed my life. It helped me to find that balance and to really value those moments of quiet when I can just kind of, look introspectively and, take that step back from life and look at things in a different, wider perspective. And
Mhm.
have you experienced anything like that where meditation has really kind of helped you to
Oh,
refocus or recenter, rebalance? I mean, what has that journey been like for you?
yeah, I've been using meditation for a very long time. With my professional background, I get, tunnel vision. So to refocus myself, I take a minute or two throughout the day to kind of breathe and focus and project myself in more of a positive aspect and really try to elevate my consciousness. That was something I did a lot on the ranch in Utah all the time. There is a place out there I call it Meditation Rock,
Hmm.
and it's one of the highest points of the property out there. And I spent so much time out there meditating, but also on a security aspect, I had total like a 360 view of the property from up there. But I would go up there at night and also try to astral project into the universe back then. This is back, 2012, 2013.
Right.
It's kind of weird looking at it now. I just did it on my own for
Hmm.
some type of spiritual evolution. But I got the privilege to meet Melissa uh, Winterton a couple years ago, and
Hmm.
she performed a piano session for me using tapping into my frequency using piano,
Oh,
and it blew me away.
wow.
She knew exactly what I was feeling, what I was seeing. It was such an emotional experience that it
Hmm.
just made me it gave me a big sense of comfort knowing that there's people involved with the ranch with that mindset. And
Right.
it made me feel so good that there's people involved with that
Hmm.
property who have that mindset. And it
Yeah.
felt like a whole bunch of weight lifted off of me. Like, wow, somebody really understands what's going on out here. So
That's
I bet that was an awesome session to be with her for that sunrise
it was
meditation.
it was it was really cool because she started with the singing bowl kind of type thing,
Yes.
and with the essential oils, and
Hmm.
it really it helped me to relax because I'm one of these people that I don't fall asleep. I will sometimes, it's not uncommon for me to go several days without sleeping
Hmm.
because my mind just doesn't shut off. I just
Yeah, yeah.
constantly have things going through my mind, and it's always been like that for me ever since I was a kid. And so being able to kind of break through that wall that I had set up, it was so simple, and Melissa was able to help me to unlock the ability to do that, and it just had such a profound impact. I couldn't put a price tag on what it's done for me, and helped me
Oh,
to find peace and a lot more calm than I ever had. Because I in the last year I dealt with the last 18 months I dealt with the loss of both of my parents, had to settle my dad's estate. I had a debilitating back injury that knocked me on my ass for, the better part of almost 6 months, which I'm still recovering from.
yeah.
And it's just, not being able to work during that time, and just it was like this perfect storm of everything. It took me down to low spots that I didn't think were possible. And one of the things that helped bring me out of that was figuring out how to unlock the ability to do that meditation and
Yeah.
find what I was looking for, which was that way to refocus and center myself, and take a step back and look at the big picture and realize that, all this stress, all this anxiety is but a blip in the sense of eternity.
Yeah.
And that's it helped me a lot. And Raj, I don't know, have you been getting into any of that at all lately, or?
That's something that I'm looking at more. I definitely need to do it. Um, I think I could really benefit from I guess, from meditation and thinking and just having some of that alone time to think and focus on myself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that self-care is so important. It really is. really is.
Absolutely.
Right on. Well, I have to ask Chris,
Yeah.
being a music guy, what kind of music are you into? What do you listen to when you're out doing your patrols or doing things like that? Is there any kind of music that particularly you're fond of?
Well, I like listening to like a lot of powwow music, and like Tribe Called Red is
Uh-huh.
a group I like to listen to.
Hmm.
Also, I mean, I'm a 80s rock, kid, and then also people don't know this, but I'm a really big into hip hop, like
Really?
oh, huge into hip hop, 80s and 90s hip hop, but mostly,
Ooh.
but
Nice.
yeah,
Okay,
and also
Beastie Boys?
yeah, Beastie Boys is cool for sure.
Hmm.
And also I'm into house music, disco house.
Oh, sweet.
I went to EDC in Las Vegas in 2012. One of the
Ooh,
most amazing events I've ever been to in my life.
yeah,
Uh, so yeah, I kind of vibe on everything really. I love all sorts of music.
that's awesome.
That's
Right
Yeah,
on.
awesome.
no,
You
nobody's ever
like
asked me that before, but yeah, I'm a big hip hop fan.
well, I work with music for a living. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
a music producer and audio engineer, so music is my life. So I always love to find out what people listen to, and what kind of music they gravitate towards. And
yeah.
it was kind of cool to learn that Travis Taylor, he's into all the Guns N' Roses, and
Oh yeah.
all that classic '80s rock. And me, obviously, I'm like you. I'm into everything. I mean, I will go from 1 minute I'm listening to AC/DC and Queensryche, and then the next minute I'll be listening to OMD, Erasure, and Tears for Fears, and then I'll be listening to some Beethoven or Tchaikovsky, and then I'll be listening to Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and then some Garth Brooks, and then some Johnny Cash. I mean, huge
Oh yeah,
Johnny Cash fan.
Johnny,
Love
me
Johnny
too.
Cash.
Love Johnny Cash. Huge Johnny Cash fan. He changed my life, man.
Right on.
Yeah, he
Awesome.
did. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Raj, do you have any questions? Anything you want to bring up for Chris?
No, I just want to thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about your experience and share that.
I appreciate it too, man. I hope to see you guys in the next Phenomenon in September. Hope I can get out there and meet you guys in person again.
Yeah,
So
that would be amazing.
that'll be cool. Thanks,
Yeah,
thanks
we
again for everything.
Oh, thank you, Chris. We so appreciate it. This has been an awesome conversation. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and
Sure.
yeah, come Phenomicon time, we will be there. And if you get here before Phenomicon and you find yourself in the Salt Lake Valley, then hit me up, man. We'll take you
Yeah,
out for tacos, man, for sure.
absolutely, for sure. I might be in that area sometime this year, so I'll hit you up.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Right
Sweet.
on. Well, thanks again, everyone. And we're going to go ahead and sign off now. So, again, Roger, thank you for always being here, my awesome co host and co creator of The Soul of the Unexplained. And once again, to Chris Bartel, thank you so much. And we will see you next time, folks. See ya.